Yeah, so if we're in the middle of something, just wait till we hit a break point, or just raise your hand so I'll know to stop. Okay? And if I use, what's that? Your left hand. Okay.
I feel like Christopher Columbus departing the unknown.
No, Christopher Columbus, think of this. Christopher Columbus was, thousands of miles away from any cappuccino machine.
Plus, he had no idea where he was going, and once he got there, he had no idea where he was. That's the problem. Oh, how beautiful.
We're going into the old town now, and this here looks like new, but actually it's not. The buildings are new, that's true, but these all used to be islands, and in the old days we had seawater here, and the big sea ships, they were coming here outside of the old town to anchor here or to dock here, and those islands, they are now transformed
from like grain.
You might have the idea that this is really a new part of Amsterdam, but it's actually a part of the old system of doing business, because all the shipping is business. This is why Amsterdam used to be like a major business port in the world.
Right.
A long time ago. That's a long time ago.
Right. And before Amsterdam, it was Stavoren.
Stavoren.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, welcome to the Solari Report. This is Catherine Austin Fitz, and I'm here in Amsterdam on the canals with Nina Heyn, author of Food for the Soul, our favorite column on the Solari Report. And I've wanted for many years to introduce you to Nina, and now I can.
Hello.
Nina was my friend in the movie industry. She had a very successful career in both journalism and in entertainment. And she was always my go-to person for any advice on movies, any advice on culture. And then when you left your last executive position, I said to you, please write a column for the Solari Report on culture. And I knew it would be good, but I never realized how fantastic it would be. So you've written one now for 2 years? I love it. It's my favorite column in the whole world. You've surpassed Peggy Noonan's editorials as my favorite column. And you were the reluctant columnist, I will say.
Still am, but...
Right. So start from when I first asked you to do this. Food for the Soul, it was your name. You named it.
Well, there is a reason why I called it Food for the Soul, and the reason is because I think that art or culture in general is something that is my personal escape and a medicine and meditation all rolled into one.
Right.
And no matter how depressing the news in the morning might be and whatever the problems might be throughout the day with the day-to-day life, this provides some kind of respite. So I was thinking that maybe I can share it with other people, and it might do the same thing for everybody else, that if you take, instead of watching one more horrible news piece on the news on television, maybe if you read for 10 minutes about something completely different, about art, in some faraway country, some movie that has been release that is talking about something interesting, that it gives you this 10 minutes of relaxation and joy and happiness in something that is totally not connected to the daily grind that we all have to experience.
So some of the columns you've written are about museums. Some are about art. Some are about movies.
Well, the idea is, that's why it says, that's why I called myself a culture scout. In other words, I'm trying to scout out for the readers the interesting exhibition that is taking place possibly at some place that you will never get to, because we are here right in Amsterdam, for example. There is a wonderful exhibition, but it's not exactly next door for most people.
Right.
Sometimes it's about a movie that maybe just came out because it's the Oscar season, and I just want to point out that this is the movie that for whatever reason is interesting. Sometimes it's a movie that is important because of the subject matter or because it is where it comes from, because I
Right.
cover foreign films, especially Chinese movies.
Right.
I think that the 21st century to a great extent belongs to China. We all know that. So we
Right.
all talk about it. But I think that the majority of people who are not living in China or not dealing with China on a daily basis are not very much aware what this country, especially contemporary China, what it is.
Yeah. Some of my favorite stories are what you have to go through to get to the Chinese movie in America.
Well, it's not easy if you're in the States, for example. You
Yeah.
literally have to go all the way to Chinatown just to see that movie.
Right.
With some kind of subtitles or without them, and that's the only way to see them because they don't get released.
Now, one of the things I love about Food for the Soul is I never know where the next story is coming from. So you're all over the world.
Well, neither do I. Whatever is an inspiration. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I think about something, or maybe I have been actually watching some movie and I think, oh, that might be something that is important. But I try to look for some trends. So in terms of movies, I look for trends.
Right.
Something that is relevant, important, that just came out, or talks about something that might be important to an investor, for example.
Right.
It might be something about the space exploration. It might be something about the geopolitics. It might be about Eastern Europe that is not very well known, but of course
Right.
is a major geopolitical factor. So I try to find something that might be relevant to a Solari subscriber.
So you've written, but you've written from your travels because you travel a fair amount. You've written from Venice. You've written from Cannes. You've written from, well, obviously Amsterdam and Milan. So we've been in the Netherlands and Italy. I'm trying to think where else. Obviously the China,
Yeah, well,
Poland.
wherever I'm going to be, and there is a museum or an exhibition that I can. But sometimes you find treasures next
Anywhere.
door.
Right.
I wrote about the technology museum in San Jose because we talk all the time about Silicon Valley. So I wanted to take a look at what is being shown or taught to the kids
Right.
about the Silicon Valley, and that was a very good museum that kind of fulfills that function.
Right.
Or I was talking about the Tutankhamun exhibition, which is something that has been going around for close to 100 years,
Right.
but it will soon stop because they have built a museum, a permanent kind of museum for the collection in Egypt, and most of the exhibits will not travel anymore.
Right.
So that is kind of last grand tour that they're doing all over the world, but after that you will not be able to see that unless you go to Egypt, which is obviously not
Right, and
close.
One of the things I wanted to mention is I often have you do the movie section for our quarterly wrap-ups and annual wrap-ups. So I say, Nina, go find me all the greatest movies on space, or go find me all the greatest movies on, mega cities. And it's amazing what you find.
But let's talk about it. Why do you think that this is a good idea to find a list of movies?
In the 1990s, when I was trying to explain to people what was happening in the economy, what I found was they just didn't have time to read a lot of text material. But what I could do is I could find the movies that would explain a certain phenomena and just say, well, watch this for this and this for this and this for this. And I could use the movies to teach in a way that I couldn't use any other medium to teach. And most people like to watch some entertainment every week. They'll watch a fictional movie, they'll watch a documentary. And so if you want to communicate information, it's a great way, you just have to tell them what's real and what's this piece. So I'm always telling people, if you want to understand the U.S. economy as of 1980, just sit down on a Saturday and watch Godfather 1, Godfather 2, Godfather 3, and realize it's not just a movie, it's your training, it's your economy training program. So I think it's very important, if you want to experience any topic and learn about a topic, if you can have both fictional movies and documentaries that guide you, it's tremendous. And to be honest, so when we did the one on megacities, there's a documentary on Shenzhen. when you watch the documentary, you go there, you feel it, you feel what it's like. And so for people who can't necessarily spend half their life traveling, it's a great way to go there and experience the people and the feeling of it.
Yes, and I also think that since we are all very, very busy, I think that this is a very good place to start. In other words, my advice always to people who are very, very busy is, choose what you watch.
Right.
Because we don't have that much time. So both the stuff that we do at Food for the Soul and at the going to the movies section and in the film lists in all the quarterly wrap-ups is about us kind of scouting out all the movies that are, television shows, documentaries, even, TED Talks or, little YouTube films.
Whoa.
Yes. Westkerke, right?
What is it?
I think it's the Westerkerke, the West.
Next to it on the front house.
Which has been painted so many times and is still amazingly gorgeous. Yes, if you live in Amsterdam, you just live with art going to work. Lovers.
Into the lights, huh?
Yeah.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel, literally.
In 2015, when I lived here for a month, and all my life I've heard many things about Amsterdam, but I never heard how beautiful it was. And yet, I think it's one of the most beautiful cities in Europe.
And probably not, well, maybe it is appreciated. These days tourist is very kind of expanded to great extent, but I think that comes across in the Dutch paintings that we have just seen, that all these incredible scenes, street scenes.
So tell us about what we saw yesterday. Tell us about all Rembrandt and the Rijksmuseum.
Well, we went to a mecca of the Dutch painting. Not that Holland is not covered with wonderful museums that have a lot of examples of paintings by Dutch masters, but what we have seen yesterday at the Rijksmuseum, which is the National Museum of Holland, is that they have decided that to celebrate the 350th anniversary of his birth, they put together an exhibition that is called All the Rembrandts. And since that museum happens to have, not all of them, but most of the good ones, so they not only mounted the exhibition of 22 paintings that are in the possession of the museum, and they are the most magnificent paintings of Rembrandt's, but also a lot of drawings. Rembrandt has created, obviously, thousands of drawings, and about, I don't know how many thousands of them are in the possession of Rijksmuseum, but what they have done is that they have taken them out and put them on the walls, which is kind of once in a lifetime opportunity because they're so fragile.
Right.
They cannot be exposed to light for much long, for long. So what has happened is that they just put them out, and we have an opportunity to see something that you never would see probably in a lifetime. It is an incredible exhibition.
It was amazing. It was amazing, but I can, this is not the first time I've been to this is my second trip to the Rijksmuseum, and the first time I went, they had that big self-portrait. It's really interesting because Rembrandt painted himself a lot, but they had the big one. If you come into the Hall of Honor and you see the Night Watch, and then if you walk from the Night Watch, then it's right over, walking out to the left. So if you're walking towards the Night Watch, it's to the right. And I walked up to it, and I hadn't seen the Night Watch yet, so I was walking from the other side. And Rembrandt is one of those painters where it doesn't, you, in a picture or poster, you don't see it until you're in front of it and you see the real thing, and you just can't believe someone can do that. You know, it always leaves me speechless, but you know, I was saying yesterday, he can paint the light in a human being. He can paint a person's field. He can paint their intelligence. And you're like, whoa, how did he do that?
Well, it's called talent, I would say, but you see that very well. We went to a museum in a small town called Leeuwarden, which is the capital of Frisia, one of the provinces of Holland. And there are two portraits there. One is a portrait painted by some Dutch painter of Saskia, Rembrandt's wife, which is a nice portrait, but it is just, you know, a picture, almost as if you had taken a photograph of something, and it's like, it's okay. And then there is a portrait of Saskia done by Rembrandt, which has life and emotion and the style and colors and light and everything is in it. And those two paintings that are kind of juxtaposed within the same small exhibition, they kind of illustrate so well what is the difference between painting something and being an incredible talent that comes once in several hundred years and it cannot be repeated, and it's not like any others.
I hadn't realized it till I saw this exhibition that Rembrandt was a painter of people.
Well, we were talking about it, that, you know, this is beautiful, but it's very, very gray. So, you know, to be a landscape painter in Holland is difficult because most of the time
you have to go to Italy.
Are not gonna come through. And most of the painters, not Rembrandt, but most of the painters actually have traveled to Italy for that obligatory, you know, a year or two in Italy painting landscape. Rembrandt has not done that, but he is a master of psychology and of observing people. You know, he's the master of people watching.
Right.
You see at that exhibition that we have seen that there's hundreds of sketches of him sketching either the people doing something or people in the street or people
it's not
in
just
an
the nobility who
interaction.
can afford to pay for a painting, it's everybody.
Absolutely, but also, you know, he just had this sketchbook and a pen with him all the time, and he was just sketching whatever he was seeing. He couldn't stop himself from observing people. A lot of this ended up in his oil paintings, but an oil painting was a major undertaking because you would have to have a commission, you know, paint. It takes a long time. Oil paintings require drying in between layers, so if you do many layers, then you have to wait for it to dry, and what do you do in between? Not that painting, so you have to do something else. Whereas the sketch is fast.
Right.
Affordable for other people if they wanted to have it, but also, you know, for him, the ability to just note some gesture or some look or some little scene. He has the scenes with a, you know, woman with a baby, you know, he has the scene of someone, the drawing that you have liked so much, the goldsmith who is sculpting
the mother with
mother with two children figure, and he's just lovingly, you know, working on it.
Okay, so I want to talk about your passion for this, because it's one thing to go to the Rijksmuseum, it's another thing to go with you, because you're so excited about it, and and you have this deep knowledge of all the different artists and the times and the history. And so kind of following you around, one of the things Robert was saying yesterday is that everybody started to ask you questions around you. And the next thing you know, you've got a crowd following you. So tell us about this passion. How did it start?
Oh, I think I grew up with art on the walls. My dad was a painter. I remember looking at, you know, art books as a kid. You know, my mom wrote about art and culture. You know, I just had it around me, which a lot of people grow up with it, especially, you know, in a lot of places like Europe. You know, you do grow up with that. You know, if you grow up here, look at this. If you go from your house that is here to a school that is across the canal, and you look at all these beautiful houses and little architectural details, and then the paintings that are in the museums, you know, you grow up with it. It's just, you just
Well, you know, it was
inhale
fantastic yesterday. There were so many classes of school children. The Rijksmuseum was filled, and the teachers, you know, the museum had special tutors who were Rijksmuseum employees who would take the class and the teacher around, and it was just, and the kids loved it. They just loved it.
Yeah, the teacher told them, find the paintings with something, or this group goes here and the other one, and who finds it faster or something. It was very interactive in a sense that they were very engaged with what they were seeing on the walls. But what these Dutch kids are looking at is their heritage. It's their culture. They own that culture. To go back to what we wanted to talk about, this is their heritage. This is their life. And that's something that probably should be given to everybody. So in our little small way with Food for the Soul, we're trying to do that, to provide the panacea for all the ills of the everyday life, but at the same time point out that art is something that is necessary for people to to live. After you have taken care of food and shelter and some really basic stuff, the next thing that people wanted in the caves was paintings on the walls. They wanted art. A human being cannot live without beauty of some sort. You might find this beauty in some decorated spear, for example, or painting on the wall, but people need art. We are art creatures, and anybody who thinks that they don't, then I think they are killing a little bit of their soul. So I cannot live without it.
I almost think of it as a form of nutrition that you must have. That's why I love the title, Food for the Soul.
Yes, but if you use this analogy, to me the analogy is that there is junk food and there is good food, right? Junk food is extremely satisfying, but it's not very good for your body. The so-called low-brow culture, whatever, popular culture, is very satisfying sometimes. It's good to see, a comic book or, a popular movie, and I do that like everybody else does. But it's not enough. So sometimes you need something that stretches, stretches you, that makes you reach out, something that is a little bit loftier and a little bit more of mastery that goes in it. The Rembrandt or DaVinci or whatever, it's something that you have to be at least familiar with it. Take a look at it. Because it's like good food. It's good for your soul. It's good for your mind.
Well, I'm with you. So following you around, it always stretches me. I think, well, why do I want to see that? I don't want to see that. And then I see it, and it's like, wow. So we went to see the space that Prada
Fondazione Prada, yes,
in Milan, and it was architecturally is one of the most uplifting spaces I've ever been in. It was just beautiful. And if you had described it to me, I would have said, oh, well, I'm probably not that, but I trust you. So I'm okay, well, Nina says we have to see this, so we really have to go see this. And it just stretches you. It was a very interesting experience for me.
Well, in Milan is also a nice juxtaposition, because Milano, obviously, there's the historical, the DaVinci Milano, if you like, of all old museums and old palaces and old churches and all this, which is something that is now living next to very modern buildings. Milano is transforming itself in the last few years from kind of very industrial business and banking center to something that is becoming more and more of a tourist destination, which is why we went to check it out. And that Prada Foundation building is a perfect example of something that has been recently built. It is transformation from an old liquor factory into a prime modern art space, but the space itself is beautiful and modern and inspiring. So it's worth checking out.
So let's talk about Own the Culture, because I remember I was doing an interview with Dr. Joseph Farrell, and he was talking about the deterioration in politics and the economy in the U.S., and he said, look, we have to stop worrying about that. We have to own the culture. Now, I'm an investment banker, so when you say to me, own the culture, I have no idea what you mean. I was like, own the culture. Well, that, I trust Joseph, so I knew he was right, but I didn't understand what he meant. So, of course, being an investment banker, the first thing I thought was, well, what's my action? If I'm going to own the culture, what's my action? So anyway, the action I came up with was doing a crowdfund to buy him a digital pipe organ. And I wrote about this in the third quarter wrap up. We went through the process and I came out the other side and I understood so much more about owning the culture. So I want to talk about owning the culture and have you describe to us what it means to you. What does owning the culture mean and why should we do it?
Well, other than what we have talked about before, that the going to museums or watching, movies that are a little bit more maybe ambitious or artistic than just the popular ones. Not that I would say that the popular ones are not worth seeing. It's something that enriches you personally, which we kind of all understand, but also for me it's an antidote to all the other negative stuff that is kind of around us just because it's provided by the news and the daily grind of life. So in that sense, owning a culture is basically have an antidote to everything else that is going on around you, just to nourish the soul. That's why, hence the title for this for so. But I'm also looking at, what happens in at least American schools, that there is such an panicky stress put on teaching children technology, science, business, the so-called STEM program that is kind of pushed in every single school. And I'm all for it because we obviously live in the technological age and the technology is just going to be taking even more space in our lives than before. However, I am trying to project in the future when all these wonderful graduates of STEM courses in college are eventually going to be heads of major companies. They will be affluent, they will be powerful, and they will want something else in life because everybody who is in that position sooner or later comes to culture. Either because they want to collect it, because now they have the money to do so, and I have yet to see an affluent person that doesn't end up collecting something when they finally can.
Right.
Or because they are dealing with the celebrities and the powerful and famous people of this world who are their peers at that point, who will be into culture, and you have to be able to converse and have a intelligent conversation. Or they will be sponsors of some cultural activities, festivals, exhibitions, programs, sponsoring program. If you have
it will be a very important part of their life.
It will be.
Right.
But if you have never learned about culture, to like it, to appreciate it, to understand it as a kid or as a young person, because you were so into technology and mathematics and physics and STEM education, then how are you going to catch up?
Well, it's very interesting when you rise all the way to the top of the money world. Once you're at the top of the money world, the question is not, how do I make money? That's not how you think. What you think is, what kind of world do we want to create, and how do we create it? And then how do we engineer the incentive system so everybody automatically helps us create it? And so at that level, it's not about making money. It's about really values and meaning. What has meaning? So I've said a lot in the Solari Report, I think the reason that space is so important is the leadership has made a concerted decision to want to become a multiplanetary civilization. Well, I know what they do. They sit around in a room, because I used to be in the room, and they say, okay, how do we make everybody want to become a multiplanetary civilization? Okay, Hollywood guys, your job is to go out and make 100 movies that make everybody want to be an astronaut or, be on Mars. So put Matt Damon on Mars and make everybody want, think he's a hero because he went to Mars and back. And, see how beautiful it is. And so it's, at the very top level, if you can't think in terms of what has meaning and how do we nourish our meaning, then you can't, at any function, whether it's design or architecture or Wall Street or money. I mean, it's really funny, when I was on Wall Street, the biggest financiers of the art in New York were the bankers. because they're dealing at that level.
That's what I mean. So, but it starts, art and, music appreciation, art appreciation has been part of school programs much more in the 20th century than it is in the 21st,
Right.
for various reasons that we all know. But I'm just saying that if it is not provided by the school, then you have to take responsibility yourself and, drag your kids to the museum and drag yourself to the museum sometimes and enjoy it.
Well,
But-
if they only go to the museums they read about Food for the Soul, they won't be disappointed.
Well, we are trying to kind of pre-digest a lot of things and kind
Right.
of find out interesting things and trends and places to go and things to check out already.
Rijksmuseum? Rijksmuseum?
Yes,
Ah, there
this
it is.
what it is.
I love that poster. You have to get that poster in
This is what we have just seen, and that we are highly
Have you seen it
recommended
yet?
to anybody who can actually get.
No, not after the renovation. I didn't go.
You have
Not
to
yet.
go. It's
Yeah, I
gonna
know.
be till June, and you have to get tickets. So get your tickets now. It's a once in a lifetime experience.
Yes, definitely
It
it is.
really is.
They are not going to take out 22 paintings in one room, so to speak, and all those hundreds of incredible drawings. It's a fantastic celebration.
So you told me a story yesterday about Steve Jobs and calligraphy that I think is a wonderful example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very well-known story that is kind of repeated in his biography and in some interviews, but to remind everybody who hasn't stumbled upon it is that Steve Jobs did not go to a regular college because he didn't think that this is something that dovetailed with what his interests were,
Right.
which is a very kind of smart and independent thing of him to say or to do. But what he did do was to attend a college in Oregon called, it's a liberal arts college, very famous, called Reed's College, and he took some classes in calligraphy, which is probably the latest thing that, someone who's technologically minded, a boy in California, who's suddenly into calligraphy, which is an old-fashioned art. But he took those classes, which is culture is purest, right?
Right.
Well, it so happens that the only reason we have this beautiful design of everything that especially early Apple products were, the clean lines,
Right.
the fantastic fonts, everything that was so precise and so beautiful and artistic and so different from everything else that the computers at the time
The
were.
design was critical to Apple's success.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that comes from that. That comes from those calligraphy classes. So it's a classic example of someone who is nothing but technology and STEM and, kind of leading edge of technological advancement, and who goes back to culture and uses that culture in some most creative way. Which would be my advice to people who, sometimes I meet people saying, well, I'm not that much into museums, which I can totally understand. But my advice would be that, first of all, it doesn't have to be an art museum, because there are wonderful museums that have collections of old weaponry, or technological museums,
Right.
or exhibitions that are of old archaeological research. So it could be something that feeds other passions and interests than just old paintings.
I love watches, and there's a watch museum in Zurich.
Exactly. So
It's tiny, but it's got an amazing collection of watches, and for centuries old.
yeah, I think it can feed whatever interest someone
Right.
might have. It could be a dolls museum, it could be a map museum, but it could be even an exhibition of anything in any big, large museum like Rijksmuseum.
Right.
So that's number one. Find a place that it's actually going to maybe provide some inspiration, a business idea, a hobby that you never had before, or something that you want to explore later on.
So
on your
I
own.
would also say it this way: I think the reason we have to own the culture is with politics and economy, all these other things, they flow out of culture. So if your culture isn't rich, these other things will never work.
for sure.
Or that never
but,
work well.
but also, we live in the 21st century where there's so many things that do not depend on us because,
Take it from we live in the 21st century.
I don't know what I wanted to say, other than I'm frozen to death.
All things stem from culture in the end, right?
No, what I wanted to say is that, there are so many things that do not depend on us because we cannot control technology that well. We can use it, but we cannot control it. We cannot control finances because, this is also big banks or, something that is beyond our control of an individual to a great extent. But what we can own is our one-on-one relationship to culture, to,
Right.
when you go and see a movie, it is your own personal experience and emotion. If you watch a series and it gives you some kind of insight into, I don't know, history of maritime development or espionage or, or history of costume or whatever it is, right?
Right.
That is your own personal gain and knowledge that no one else can interfere with. If I go to a museum and I look at this incredibly beautiful painting that I always wanted to see, never had a chance, finally I saw it, and then I discovered that the painting is completely different from what I imagined, because that's what happens very often.
We'll probably survive. We'll be fine.
And to me, this is owning culture, that
Right.
this is one area where you have some power of having your own personal discoveries and joys that do not require anybody else's intervention. It doesn't require that much money, it doesn't require that much technology, it doesn't require anything really. You just go to a museum or or you pay $10 and you see a movie and you have your own world that is nourishing and inspiring and feeding whatever needs
Now,
one might have.
Another thing that you talk about in Food for the Soul, which I love, is the economics of whatever you're writing about. Not always, but particularly on the movies. And you have an understanding for the whole sort of industry and the economic process. When I started about 10 years ago, first, looking seriously at the stock market, one of the things that struck me is between the time I was on Wall Street and then the time I started to go deep into the economics, fashion, entertainment, design had become a much bigger portion of the equity markets, both in the United States and globally. I was stunned. I couldn't, in my world, on Wall Street, a pocketbook company couldn't have $1 billion value. That just wasn't, you had to make chemicals or toothpaste, or Colgate-Palmolive was one of our clients at the time. So, but I was stunned because the percentage of the market cap that came from all things beautiful, really from beauty. And so when Macron last year said, the French has no one culture, I thought, is he crazy? Is he trying to, kill the French stock market? What kind of investment banker is Macron? But it's because it has become it's become obvious at what a huge part of the economy it is.
Yes and no. I would say I always want to talk about it because, the film industry is my world, and it is definitely an industry, precisely because, as you say, it is a very crazy industry, if you can just go off on a tangent for a second, because in no other industry you can invest $100 million on a Thursday, and on a Friday morning when the film comes out, you have absolutely zero return. You've just lost $100 million in production, right, plus $200 million in marketing costs.
Right.
So there is no other industry I know that you have that kind of, gambling situation.
Right.
And it is something that could be a gift that keeps on giving, as you can see with major franchises where someone comes with some kind of an intellectual property, whatever it is going to be, a comic book or, you know, even a little tale of Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, which is what Walt Disney came up with in 1935, and it's still how much money it is making till today, billions upon billions,
Well,
right?
you know what it reminds me of is going into the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican and realizing, oh my God, you know, because it's packed with people. And it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Well, art, yes, has the
Yeah.
tendency to do it. I mean, look how many millions are going to go through that Rijksmuseum exhibition.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And you know, culture in general is big business because of the uniqueness of works of art. That's why they fetch such incredible prices, because every work of art is unique. I mean, there's only one. So that excites everybody's imagination, and that's what drives prices, because anybody who actually owns a piece of art, they know that the price is always going to go up.
Right.
Unlike any other commodity in the world, it is not going to lose value. It is almost impossible.
Right.
So there's that. However, on the other hand, when people get very, very excited with the let's say a movie has cost $1 million, $100 million, and then it didn't make enough money and everybody gets upset. To which I'm saying, for a consumer, that movie is worth only $10, meaning what you're going to pay at the box office. Whether the movie cost a 50 million, 5 or 500 to make it and market, it has absolutely no relationship to what the viewer is experiencing. You just spent $10 at the box office.
Right.
So forget about the cost of the movie. It's something that people get so seduced in when they watch it, you know, on the news. Oh, well, they said that the movie is not so good. Sometimes I write about a film and I think it's a fantastic movie for whatever reason. I try to point out, you know, this is an interesting movie because A, B, and C. You may like it, you may not like it, but check it out because there's something important about it. And then people say, yeah, but the movie, you know, tanked at the box office. I'm saying it has absolutely no meaning. First of all,
I agree.
You know, art, you know, there is no good or bad art.
Right.
Art just is, you know,
Right.
whatever it is, it speaks to you or it doesn't. And the
Right.
same is with the movie. Either you like the movie or you hate the movie. I'm just trying to point out that maybe it is important, but, you know, the cost of it making.
I think what it reflects is if you look at market capitalization, I think it reflects the extraordinary human desire for beauty.
For beauty.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I
Yeah.
think it's something that we have as an innate need in humans. And it may be not, and the beauty is different for, you know, beauty is in the eye of beholder, we say, for a reason. In other words, it may be something is beautiful to you and it's absolutely ugly to someone else, but we have that need to have something else
Right.
than
One
food.
of the reasons I knew I would never last long in Washington was when I was the assistant secretary, we were building elderly housing. It's called a 202 program. And I looked at the designs of the building and I said, these buildings are ugly. Let's get an architect and make them beautiful. And they said, oh no, they're purposefully ugly. I said, why would you? Because you reduce the value of the building. You spend money and you reduce the value of the building, and so it's very bad for the financial soundness of the building. I said, why would you do that? And they said, oh, it's, you know, because we're subsidizing people with taxpayers' money, and politically it's essential that the buildings be ugly.
So that people don't feel envious.
Right.
Nederlandse bank, de Dutch central bank.
Ah,
That's what the real power is, right?
wow. It's like a little BIS.
And I'm sure that bank has something to do with all the art, meaning, you know, they store it, they invest in it,
Right.
they finance it, of course.
So you were helping me at the beginning of the year with our chronology. Every year we do a chronology just so we anticipate the events of the year. And it was through that process that I discovered that this year, 2019, was going to be the 500th anniversary for Leonardo da Vinci and the 350th anniversary of Rembrandt. And I called you and I said, Nina,
We have to cover it.
we have to do something. And the first thing we did, or you did, was you wrote a wonderful article on Leonardo, a wonderful column on
Well, it's the
Leonardo?
first of the series because we have decided that we're going to do a Year of Leonardo at Solari for 2019, and we're going to talk about, various aspects of his legacy and exhibitions and what is said and known these days about him and how he's important and inspiring for us right now. Then the same thing we're going to do with Rembrandt as well. So we will be coming back to that theme.
Well, you had already covered his painting in Krakow.
Which I consider the most beautiful painting by Da Vinci, bar none.
Tell us about it.
Well, the funny thing is that when you go to a place like Milano, you see that painting, which is called Lady with Ermine, in various posters, shown even at some museum stores. And you would just think, yes, it is the most beautiful painting by Leonardo, but it is not in Milan. It's actually in Poland, in Krakow, and rightly so, because it was actually purchased by Prince Adam Czartoryski in the year 1800, for his collection. The provenance of it is very well known, and he actually saved that painting from probably very bad fate, because I think it was purchased from a family that was just trying to get rid of it.
Right.
That painting has had a very tumultuous history, which is basically a history of Europe, because he had to take this painting out of Poland during an uprising that took place in 1831. So about 30 years after the painting was brought into Poland, it had to be taken out to Paris so it wouldn't be destroyed during the uprising. And I kept kind of going back and forth. Unfortunately, at some point, ended up in Poland again in 1930s when Poland regained independence, which unfortunately also did not last long.
You have to look down there.
Oh, how beautiful.
There's the Amstel Hotel behind you.
Ah,
Yes, it is lovely. We love every second of it. So what happened was that the Czartoryski family, which is one of the aristocratic families of Poland, have taken it to Poland. It was displayed in the National Museum in Krakow in 1930s. What they did not kind of plan on is on Hitler invading Poland
Right.
in 1939. And the first thing that Hitler did is gave the order to take the painting and take it, take a possession of it.
right.
It was kept by the governor, the German, Nazi governor of southern Poland, in the castle. And then when the Germans started retreating from, towards the end of the Second World War, the painting was taken to Germany together with a beautiful Raphael painting. The Raphael painting, which is the very famous painting of a young man, it has not been found. It is lost.
Wow.
That one was found by the Monument Men, if you recall the movie.
Yeah. The George
That
Clooney
is
movie.
one. This,
Yeah.
like the altar of Ghent, the dame with Ermine has been found. There is a very famous picture of one of the Monument Men holding that picture in Germany when they found it in one of the salt mines or whatever mine it was that they found it in Altensee, I think it's called. So that painting has had this incredible history of being, lost, hidden. You could make a movie just of the history of this painting, what this painting went through, and the incredible luck that we still have it 500 years later. It's one of the most beautiful paintings. It's a painting of Cecilia Gallerani, who was the mistress of Lodovico Sforza, the patron of Da Vinci. So it is a painting of a woman in love with his patron. Right. The Ermine, which is this beautiful little white rodent that she's holding, is actually a symbol. It's kind of play on words.
Right.
On the name of Gallerani, and also because it's in the coat of arms of Sforza, so it is like kind of hidden meaning. Renaissance paintings often have like a
Hidden meaning.
Hidden meanings. It's a beautiful painting. It's just one of the most beautiful paintings in the world.
So we went to Milan. Tell us what we learned about Leonardo in Milan. What we saw.
Well, what we have learned is something that is well known, but it kind of is get reinforced when you go to Pinacoteca Ambrosia and see the display of these incredible technical drawings of various machines that he was inventing or improving for textiles, for hydraulics, for the presses. These are basically technical drawings by someone who is at heart an engineer and an inventor and a scientist. He also happened to paint,
Right.
but that's not
What was not
what was
he
about.
did not consider that. He also painted.
He also painted, which is what he says as himself. But you can see that there is one beautiful painting of a musician that is in the same Pinacoteca Ambrosiana displayed. So, but also there are traces of Da Vinci everywhere in Milano. There is a statue of him. There are other museums. The Milanese people talk about him as if he was still living there, walking the streets.
You know, I know it's a funny comparison, but he basically, it's like Elvis in Memphis. He belongs to.
Hi,
You agree? You agree?
they are definitely agreeing with us.
So tell us about these locks.
These what?
These are.
Deze sluizen. These are the old water locks inside the Amstel River. So the Amstel River used to be blocked all the way from there with the sea locks. But on this side you could also block the river itself. And nowadays they still use it, even though they're very old, to flush the canals. So 3 times a week they close everything down, the whole river, in the night, and then in the morning they will open it gently, and then because of the water is a little bit higher, it will clean our canals.
It's amazing. It's an amazing system.
I mean, they're masters of water management. I wish they could teach the world what.
The first thing we did when we got to Milan was we did a walking tour,
Yes.
and we saw the Last Supper. So tell us about the Last Supper.
Actually, you tell us first, because you had
Well,
this
first of
incredible
all-
experience.
The Last Supper is one of those paintings where it's completely different in a photograph or a poster than in person, because it's again, Da Vinci can paint the light in people, and it's also very human. It's not staged, it's not stiff, so each person is very human. And of course, naturally my greatest interest was not artistic. You really see it when you see the painting in person. The person sitting, when you're facing the painting to Jesus' left, is Mary Magdalene. It's a woman. It's obvious it's a woman. And yet the tour guide is telling you that it's John the Baptist, which is, and you think, I live in a world where the official reality is so completely patently false. I can't believe that this wonderful, who is marvelous, we had a marvelous tour guide, this marvelous tour guide literally has to say with a straight face that person is a man, when clearly it's not. And you just, but it's so much more obvious in person. Anyway, I was blown away. I thought the Last Supper was absolutely beautiful. So I found it to be a very inspiring experience.
I agree. I totally agree. It's exactly the same feeling that I have very often when I go to museums, that I had an image thanks to, books, art books, or a movie, that a painting is going to be whatever size or whatever look, and then I go there and it's something completely different. The texture
Right.
is different, or the size is different, or the colors are different. And this is something that we know that is extremely damaged. Unfortunately, Da Vinci was the author of his own demise in this respect, because he used tempera paint, which are based on egg whites, and that does not apply very well to plaster. He was experimenting, but unfortunately he was experimenting on Last Supper and not on something little that was not that significant. So the painting is not in a very good shape, and it's hard to see colors. But even with with this incredible damage that is done to plaster, you still see huge, beautiful figures of people that
Right.
are in a very natural. They're not in a painted in a conventional way.
It's a real dinner.
Yeah, they're sitting there, they're having an interaction. Jesus is in the middle of talking. There are some groups of apostles who are saying, well, they can't be. They are arguing with themselves. There are some that are just shocked. There are some that are kind of turning away from the idea. Some of them who want to deny it. He painted in a most unconventional way, because actually what happened was that the Last Supper theme, that table with 12 apostles and Jesus in the middle, has been a convention of painting for hundreds of years. It was not something that was new. What was new is how he composed these people. He kind of threw out all the conventions out of the window and painted it his own way. I do agree with you that if you know nothing about who these people are in that painting, and you know nothing about the Christian religion, and you just walk and look at this painting, the person on the left of Jesus Christ is clearly a beautiful woman who is his companion, partner, wife, whatever.
Right.
They are together, they are the central people of the painting, and everybody else is just around them. This is so patently obvious. And I know that the tradition is different, but I just cannot buy it when I look at this painting. This is not how he painted it, no matter what the intention was. This is not how he painted it.
We talked about Da Vinci was about his medical notebooks. I mean, Da Vinci was an engineer and a scientist. And so we saw the Codex Atlanticus, which is many of what remains of his workbooks. But tell us a little bit about what you told me about his medical notebooks.
This is something that is extremely well known these days, that his research into anatomy that he has done by actually doing dissections rather than relying on any texts that were passed on from one generation to the other, which were inaccurate. He decided to do what he did with everything else in terms of research, namely to do the research himself and come to conclusions himself. So in terms of anatomy, there was this wonderful marriage of someone who is willing to spend decades studying the tissues himself, and also being able to draw them extremely accurately, and someone who would spend a lot of time trying to figure out what is the actual blood flow within a body and what is the structure of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
What I find is such a tragedy is that once he has discovered all these things, which have been proven to be correct, in fact some last confirmations of the correctness of his research were done as late as 1960s. And obviously now we can definitely confront it because we can do MRI, which obviously was not available even in 1960s. But the problem is that his notebooks have never been published. So all this knowledge that he has gathered in 16th century has not been available for the subsequent 500 years to anybody.
Right. Oh, beautiful.
Oh, how beautiful. And that is the saddest thing here, that
Right.
the research was done. It was extremely correct, and it could have been so helpful for the generations of surgeons and doctors.
So we have 450 years of pain that didn't have to happen
Correct.
for lack of one publisher.
Exactly.
Right.
Culture and knowledge should not be lost. It should be supported by everybody and everywhere, because it serves the greater good of humanity.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. These wonderful notebook pages were just, stuck, dispersed all over the world. Some of them stuck in the musty libraries, collected as separate pages by various collectors who, would literally go and slash the pages because they liked the image. We have seen in Codex Atlanticus, there's this lovely page that we both liked, which is a very accurate.
I loved it.
It's a very accurate map of Europe, you know, with the outline of
It's
Italy
phenomenally
and
accurate,
Spain and France. It's extremely well done. It's on the same page where he's also having a little sketch of the flying machine. So maybe he was trying to figure out would that machine
I know what
fly
he was trying
from
to do.
A to B.
He was trying to figure out how he could get around Europe cheaply.
Exactly, flying instead of. But the funny thing is that while you look at this lovely map, you see this blank rectangle there, which was repaired. What has happened is someone cut out England. Maybe an Englishman who just wanted to have a map of England
Well,
by
there have
DaVinci.
been many times throughout history when continental Europe has tried to cut out England.
I am not commenting on Brexit.
I have to break in because
Yeah.
I hear you talking about Rembrandt and
Yes.
Nachtwacht.
Yes, yes.
Night watch is Nachtwacht in the Dutch language.
Nachtwacht, yeah.
This is maybe nice for you to actually see because this is the old town, this whole part. And there you see the Hotel de l'Europe, that it has a round corner. The rounding used to be a tower, a defense tower. And then from
Hotel
that
de
tower
l'Europe.
to that tower here, you see Doelen Hotel. That's also a tower. Between those two towers there used to be a wall. So later they built these houses. Also the hotel was built later. So now what I want to show you, you see the clock on the top of the Doelen Hotel. And the two
People?
people to the left and the right. You recognize those two from the night
That's the
watch.
captain and the lieutenant from the night watch.
From the night watch, yes.
Captain Cock and his
Yeah.
lieutenant.
And actually the painting was painted inside that building because
Really?
that building, that used to be
The city
that
hall?
tower. No, that
No.
used to be the where the company of shooting club was housed. And since the guys from the shooting club did not go to Rembrandt to his atelier
He
for
need to come
posing,
to them, yes.
Rembrandt had to go and visit them in there. So actually he painted it there.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Thank you.
Wow.
Welcome.
Wow.
Presented to you by Wikipedia.
Okay, so what's the action? If I listen to this and I say, okay, you know, I get it. I need to own the culture.
Yes.
How do I, and everybody's different, so it's different for everybody, but what does somebody do? They sit down and they say, okay, I want to own my culture. What do I do?
First of all, ignore the people who are going to tell you that you have to know something about art in order to appreciate. In order to write about it or, you know, to do something professionally with it, then yes, it would be nice to have a little bit of knowledge, experience, blah, blah, blah. But if you just want to appreciate it, ignore. There is no such thing as good art or bad art. The art just is. It either speaks to you or it doesn't. So just go for it. That's number one. Number two is, since time is short, everybody is busy, choose what you see. Don't see like everything, you know, just because it's
There's a lot of bad
being
stuff.
streamed.
Right.
And time is short, life is short. So we try to help by, you know, already pre-scouting various interesting things to see,
Right. So you only
watch.
write about things you really like.
Yes, I don't write about things that I'm not recommending because what's the point?
Right.
So that's another piece of advice, you know, just since there's not much time, just choose what you see. Ignore the need to actually know something. You don't need to know anything to enjoy art. Go to museums. You know, sometimes you can just bring the kids, you know, use kids as a pretext. They don't have to be art museums, they could be any museums. If you're in museums, I would highly recommend going to bookstores because they're extremely inspirational.
Right.
Museum bookstores usually have better books than any other place that you could find. You can just browse and they could give you ideas, business ideas, for example, investment ideas, hobbies, any kind of exploration. Sometimes museum is actually, I wrote about it, that sometimes what is the most interesting thing about a museum is its garden or its
Right.
bookstore.
Right.
Or the outside of the museum, or the terrace. It's not necessarily the
Right.
museum itself with
I
whatever
was
art
just
inside.
earlier this year or last year I was in Mexico City, And I went to they have an anthropology, sort of a cult history of Mexico museum that is fantastic, but the gardens all around and outside are as spectacular as everything that's inside. It's
Perfect
amazing.
example.
Right.
Exactly, with the stone art in there.
Right.
And then if you find something that is interesting, let's say a TV show that you're streaming, then this also can be a very good source of information about whether I should invest in it, whether I want to travel there, whether I should find out something more about it. Do I want to live there? There is a great repository of information that is hidden in all these movies and shows.
Right. You learn a lot about your history that you didn't know.
Exactly.
Right. I do really want to encourage everybody, because DaVinci is going to be Hero of the Year on the Solari Report. So, and the whole world is celebrating DaVinci. So we're going to do more on DaVinci, and I do want to encourage everybody to dive in, and because, as you know, I think DaVinci, if you look at the people who brought us out of the Dark Age, it was a surprisingly small group of people, and DaVinci was clearly one of them. And so I think it's he's a very appropriate hero for our times today, because, I feel we have a group of people trying to drag us into a dark age. I don't want to go there. So I'm interested in, okay, who's done this before? Who's pulled us out of a dark age? How do we do it? So tell us more about some of the other DaVinci things we're going to do this year.
Well, other than reporting back about great stuff that happens in Milano, there are two fantastic exhibitions that are coming up that I'm just going to talk about, that they exist. I don't know if we'll be able to cover them all. One of them is going to be an exhibition of his paintings at the Louvre, since there are about 17 paintings that are attributed to, or kind of confirmed that they are Leonardo's paintings. So if the Louvre is going to show at least 5 or 6 of them, then this is going to be a major feast, because normally you don't see that many paintings in one place. London, the Queen's Gallery in the Buckingham Palace has an upcoming exhibition of Leonardo's drawings from Codex of Windsor. So these are at least 2 big exhibitions that we will try to cover or talk about. But I also want to talk about one more thing in terms of DaVinci.
What you will do, after a short intermission, I will jump on shore and get us a warm cup of coffee.
Nothing like Vikings.
Cappuccino with soy milk.
Soy milk here, regular here.
When you worked in an office, what did you do?
Credit management.
You're talking to
I
a
know.
banker, what can I tell you?
I'm talking to.
How do I explain it? I probably know more about financial fraud than any human being you've ever met.
But do you think that we will ever be able to solve that fraudulent system?
Well, it's a political problem. In other words, there are many different ways of solving
Only
it.
political, or is it also inside the people?
No, if you're going to solve it, you have to run the planet with transparency.
Yeah.
And the problem is, when you have secrecy in a system, secrecy creates enormous power and privilege.
Yeah.
And nobody likes to give up their power and their privilege. So how do you get out of something it's like an addiction? Secrecy is an addiction because it can make you so much money. Right, there's a percent that should be classified in secret, but it's overseen by the governance structure, which is voted for and approved. In the United States, that's not the case. So, the United States has really gone way off course because the vast majority of the money is now secret. Oh, here he comes. Cheers.
Defreeze.
No, I didn't. I was stupid enough. I mean, we started talking about, but I think we should mention the fact that when you see those kids in the museum, and it's not necessarily in European museums because it happens also in, you know, any American museum every day of the week, I think,
Right.
to a certain extent, that this is a form of owning culture to me, that when you go to a museum, you know, you support it when you go. Not only you get something for yourself, meaning, you know, an experience, a pleasant afternoon and a nice experience learning something or seeing something beautiful, but it is part of the cultural heritage, not you know, national heritage, cultural heritage, whatever it is that you're looking at. And that is something that should belong to everybody. That's why I'm so happy when there are museums. Any city that has a lot of museums that are vibrant and robust and functioning is providing a counterweight to
You know what I
the lack
saw?
of culture.
What I saw in the kids at the Rijksmuseum was they were so proud of being Dutch. They were just, I'm Dutch, I'm great. You know, Dutch people do great things. You know, Dutch people sail the world and trade with countries all over the world, and Dutch people paint fabulous paintings and make beautiful buildings, and you know, and there was just so much pride that, you know, they were so proud to be a human and to be Dutch, and this was ours. You know, you could tell they really think of the Rijksmuseum as belonging to them. This is ours, we're Dutch. So, you know, I said to you yesterday, if somebody tried to take the night watch out of the Netherlands, I can't imagine there would be the equivalent of the storming of the Bastille. They would all be down there preventing it from happening.
But going back to, you know, us in general, every one of us, how we can own culture. You know, to me also owning culture is not physically owning anything, but, you know, making an effort to, for example, to travel somewhere and look and enjoy whatever it is that we go to. And sometimes it's wonderful because it's a trip to Paris and we actually went to the Louvre, but even if it's a trip to San Jose and we saw a little museum there, this is fun too, you know?
You know, sometimes subscribers say to me, the world is so depressing now, I can't take the time to enjoy things. How can you feel joy when these things are going on? And I say to them, oh no, that's exactly why you need to feed your soul. You know, your soul, feeding your soul creates the faith that you use to create your life. So if you're going to create your life, you've got to create the ingredients that you're going to use to create it. So you've got to feed your soul.
Well, for me, it's just the opposite. The more depressing things are around you, the more there's a need to go and say, no, I'm not going to let it get to me. I'm going to go and enjoy something beautiful for an hour in a day, but it is mine.
Right. So when I saw the Book of Kells in Dublin, realizing that the monks had spent, you know, hundreds of years creating something that had extraordinary integrity and beauty, and it reminded me, you know, I could hear my mother's voice, if you're going to do it, you know, you should do it right. And it reminded me of how the debasement really distracts us from taking the time to do something that has extraordinary integrity, and the importance of having integrity in anything that we do and doing things with integrity. And I find Leonardo da Vinci and Rembrandt both, but you know, da Vinci's kind of my favorite. They give you such inspiration, and I saw that in the kids because they're thinking, oh, this is excellent, and I'm part of something that's excellent, and I can be excellent. And you know, that's my reaction every time I look at anything that da Vinci ever did. And my reaction when I look at Rembrandt, or that, you know, I love to stand in front of the Night Watch. I can stand in front of that painting for a long, long time. So it's inspiring, and it reminds me that we really ought to seek excellence, and we're perfectly capable of it.
There's also something to say about both artists being extremely uncompromising, because if you take Rembrandt, for example, at some point in his life he was poor, not that much appreciated as an artist anymore, lonely, and he did not have any commissions. And he was given a commission to paint a big painting for the city of Amsterdam. And he has chosen to paint a painting which was something that was of interest to him. It's a biblical scene, but it is, or antiquity scene, but it is portraying an old man whose one of the eyes is kind of closed, so he's blind in one eye. So he doesn't look very, very good. It is an extremely expressive face, and this is something that he wanted to paint. So he painted it this way. Well, sure enough, the city of Amsterdam was not very thrilled with this, and they decided that this is not the commission that he's going to pursue. I mean, he did the kind of preparatory drawing, but it was never finished. So here's a man who, you know, the easiest thing would be to paint something pretty, you know, and a nice biblical scene with, you know, beautiful colors and rich fabrics, everything that he was an exquisite master of, and all he needed to do is to paint it.
And he wouldn't do it.
And he would get the money and, you know, and get his recognition and respect back, and everything would be fine, but he wouldn't do it because artistically that would be a compromise, which he did not want to do. It is something to be really very, something to admire, because not every artist agrees to do that or decides to do that. It takes a lot of guts to make that kind of decision in life, you know, for an artist not to paint and for someone else not to do something else, but it takes a huge amount of courage to make that kind of decision.
Right.
So it's an inspiration as well, you know, as a person, not necessarily only as an artist.
Wow.
We're going by the bridge that is made in 1754. Speaking of history.
Wow.
That's what people from all over the world probably come here for.
So we
the
all want to
sense
know
of
what's on
history.
your bucket list.
Behaving like a tourist.
It's long, your bucket list.
It's a very long. I mean, I have never met a museum I didn't like. I have never met an exhibition.
Actually, no. There was one you didn't write about. So
Yes, I saw an exhibition recently that I actually made a huge effort to go and see for Solari, and then I decided that there's nothing, if you cannot say anything good about it, then don't say anything. So I didn't do it. But yes, there's a few nice places. But in terms of what we're going to be covering for Solari is definitely we're going to talk about Da Vinci in a sense, beyond Mona Lisa, because we all know Mona Lisa, Da Vinci, that is kind of easy. But there's many other things that we can talk about that people maybe have not had the chance to find out about. We are going to talk about Rembrandt, not only because we want to celebrate his legacy, but also because there's so many wonderful treasures that are worth discovering and to talk about. We are going to talk about movies that are coming down the pipeline that are interesting and worth pursuing. And also there is a sense
you just have to confess on camera how many movies you watch a year.
Well, if you add the TV shows and student films and documentaries and any other kinds of audiovisual materials, then it's probably something like 1,000 a year, which most people probably would not have the patience to do. But that's the function of a scout, you know. I would pre-scout 1,000, you know, movies for choosing 2 or 3 or 5 a year.
And you find delicious things, just delicious. I love your column because, well, I told you, whenever I always read it before it publishes, not because I want to check it, because I just want to check it out. So I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank you enough for this introduction for the subscribers, because I think that if you look at how I feel stretched by your presence in my life and everything I've learned from you, including on this trip, I feel totally, I don't know how to describe it. I feel younger. I feel more open. I feel more surprised. I feel more joy. I feel like I've eaten.
But that's not me. It's the arts that you are exposed to. I'm just your guide.
You're my
towards
scout.
it. Your scout.
Yeah, but when you're not around, I end up diving into a lot of bad stuff that doesn't feed my soul. So if I just follow you, I don't need to, you know, I hate to say this, I don't need to think about it, but I'll just follow you. Anyway, so Nina, Heyn, thank you so much. On behalf of all of Solari, thank you for what you do for us. You bring us food for our soul.
You're most welcome. And it's a wrap.
It is.
And now I can put 5 more layers and be completely totally frozen because
She's
I'm now
freezing.
shaking from cold. I'm literally shaking. Like, look at my hands, they're shaking.
Food for the soul. Nina does Stalingrad.
Yes. I mean, I have a suggestion. Could we tape the next installment in Hawaii? Because I'm so cold. I don't function in that temperature.
So I had 10 subscribers come to Stavoren, and they kept emailing me and saying, "What's the weather like?" And I said, "Oh, it's warm, it's sunny, it's beautiful." They get there, suddenly it's what was the wind speed?
It was a storm, yeah?
It was 5 days of windstorms and rain and gray. This is like Hawaii compared to what it was. It was unbelievable. And at night it sounded like the whole
Howling.
building was going to be blown
Yeah, you
away.
sent me something that the wind is howling.
Something very beautiful.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I want a photo for my kids.